Hello everyone, I am Darpan Baviskar, and in this video, we will have a deep dive into the LG refresh mechanism. So without any delay, let's get started. So let's talk about the master-slave architecture overview. Uh, we will be talking. So this whole LG ecosystem is based upon a master-slave architecture. So, what is a master node? So the master node controls the navigation. It receives the user input via, let's say, a tablet or mobile, etc. So the master node is responsible for carrying the input output things and controls the navigation. Now, what are slave nodes? Slave nodes is responsible for displaying uh, on the screens synchronized with the master's view orientation. Then view coordination. Each slave knows its physical location relative to the master, whether it is to the left or to the right, or two steps to the right, etc. And it ensures a panoramic consistency across all display without any image distortion, and a full resolution is maintained on each screen independently. So this was brief about master-slave architecture for Liquid Galaxy. Now let's move on to the next page. What is Liquid Galaxy and why refresh matters? So first of all, you may have a question, what is KML and what is KML refresh? So KML is a XML based language and its full form is keyhole markup language, and it is used to control the content displayed on the Liquid Galaxy screens. And the refresh mechanism ensures that the Googler displays the latest KML content without any manual interference or restart. And it is critical for the dynamic content updates across masters and slave screens. So, this is why refresh matters in the Liquid Galaxy screens. So, let's see why it matters. Enables a real-time content updates, let's say logo, tours, 3D models, etc. And it prevents stale data from being displayed. So let's say you have some old data into your master machine and you didn't refresh, then the old data will be always rendered onto the master screen, and you won't be able to see the latest KML files which you prefer to see. And it allows a seamless transition between different virtualizations. So in this whole refresh mechanism, there are three key players, which is the master node, that is the central KML file, which is oftenly written as the master.kml. The slave nodes, which are screen specific KML files of the slaves, and they are oftenly named as slave underslash x.kml. If let's say there are, let's say, three machines in which, let's say, the middle one is the master and the other two on the left and right are the slaves machine. So the one on the left may be named as a slave under slash 3.kml, etc. And the Google Earth instances, it reads and displays the KML from the given directory here. So let's move on to the next page. Let's deep dive into the Liquid Galaxy architecture here. So as you can see here, you can see there are five screens, and let's say the middle one is the master machine and the others are the slaves. So what happens? This all machines are connected via each other via a NAT network, NAT. So what happens here? And then the master one is connected to a outer switch or a controller with SSH connection. So what happens here when, let's say I have a controller, let's say I have a mobile, and when I send a signal to the master machine, it it actually processes and it displays whatever the KML file is onto screens, such that it is synchronized with all the slave machines, and so that ultimately as a result we get a panoramic display. So this was all about the Liquid Galaxy architecture. Now let's move on to the next slide. let's talk about the KML refresh concepts. So KML is basically a file, and it is used in Liquid Galaxy for different scenarios. For example, for place marks, for overlays, for models like 3D objects, ground overlays, and for cameras or look at, which is basically used for flying to a location or in building tours. So let's talk about place marks. So let's say if our KML is about place marks, and when we will do a refresh, we will be able to see icons, positions, or even scales onto the Google Earth on our Liquid Galaxy screens, and the impact will be an instant visual update. Let's talk about overlays. Let's so if our KML is about overlay, then after a refresh, a PNG or a JPG file of images is appeared onto a screen, and the impact is it takes about 1 to 2 seconds for a reload. Then let's talk about 3D object. Uh, After a refresh, a 3D .dai files get appeared onto the screen, and as it is and it after impact it takes about 2 to 3 seconds for large models. Then for ground overlays, you will be able to see a geo-referenced images, and this is the impact here as you can see. And for the camera and the outlook part, you will be able to see a viewpoint direction after a refresh. So let's say we use this camera and the outlook to do a tour or to fly to a required location, and the impact is on a synchronized via UDP. So let's move on to the next page. Now let's talk about two-step refresh process. So here in LG, the refresh is basically can be broken down into two steps. One is the step one, the add refresh interval, and the second one is the remove refresh interval. So let's talk about the first step here. So this is the command to do the add refresh interval. I won't be going into explaining this command go line by line. I'll be giving you a basic simple overview of what this command does. So here it modifies the KML reference to include this refresh mode container. So after this command actually adds a refresh mode container into our old KML file, and then it also sets a refresh interval to 1 second. It also adds a refresh interval container to our KML file. So container is, as you know, as in in HTML, there is a concept of containers. You may have heard about div container. So it is the same thing here. So you add refresh mode container, refresh interval container, and then it you force the Google Earth to check the file every second. So this was the basic, uh, the basic of the step one. Now let's move to the step two, what it does. So as you can see, the step two is about removing the refresh interval and applying a cache busting here. So this is the code for the remove command. So what it basically does, it removes the temporary refresh interval tags which we have created into our first step. It also replaces the href container with this macro here, as you can see the macro here. And then this forces a fresh patch bypassing the cache. So this was all about the refresh processes. So as you can see in the diagram, this is more easier to visualize and to understand the process. So let's say this is our old KML file state start sync. Let's say start sync. Then we go to the add phase where we inject a refresh mode container and a refresh interval container and set it to 1 second, and then we wait. There is a wait phase where we add a 1 second delay. This is very crucial because it allows the Google Earth to detect changes and reload. Then we go to the remove phase. We remove the refresh tags that we have added in our add phase. Then it prevents continuous reloading, and then we get our final ready state which is the refreshed KML file. So this is a very simple diagrammatic explanation of the two-step refresh process. So let's move on to the next page. So here is a one of the most useful real-world examples. So this function is all about sending a KML to our master machine via our LG controller. So we are basically sending a KML. This KML sending can be for various scenarios. Let's say for overlaying a image overlaying, then overlaying ground overlays, then doing a tour, then flying to a particular location, sending a 3D KML, etc. etc. So what we do here, first of all, we define a KML path where we have to where we have to put our new KML. So we are putting our KML into the master.kml, which is responsible for all the input output transactions. So in the first step, what we do, we write new KML content to master.kml. So here, first of all, we do some uh, basic refining steps here, and then we echo and we use this command. We echo the KML into KML path. Now, what is echo? Echo is a Linux command which is used to write some strings into a particular file. So this escaped KML is basically a string, and then we overwrite it onto our KML path into the master.kml, and then we run this command. And as you can see, after running this command, we do a force refresh of master.kml. So let's take a pause and think on it. After running this command, after we overwrite our required KML into master.kml, and then we will see our LG screens, you won't be able to see the results because you have not refreshed your screens. Uh, and let's say you have some old KMLs displayed onto your LG screens, the same old KMLs will be still be displaying onto your screens. Why? Because you have not refreshed your screens, your master KML precisely. So this function is used to refresh your master screen, and as you do a force refresh of your master, after within 1 to 2 seconds, you will be able to see your new result of your master of your new KML which you have sent it. And then, uh, as a very basic and a very good practice, you clear the KMLs onto your master.kml after you used it. So this was all about using the refresh mechanism into one of the basic functions which we use in the LG ecosystem here. So let's move on to the next page. Let's talk about two refresh variants. So as you can see in this table, there is a method force refresh 1 and a force refresh 2. This force refresh 1 targets to refresh the slaves specifically. You have the slaves specifically. You have to give importance here. This is for the slaves, and this force refresh 2 is for the master one. And what is the use case of the force refresh one? It is used to refresh logos, slave screen overlays, etc. And the second one, which is used for refreshing a master, the use case is for tours, 3D models, and main content. So it is very important to understand that the refresh is used for two things in the Liquid Galaxy. One is to refresh the slaves, and one is to refresh the master. So, first of all, let's say a user want to send a KML file. uh, First of all, the KML has some scenarios in it. So let's say the scenario is for doing a tour. So the user has to send the KML to the master.kml, and he has to do a refresh of master. If he does the refresh of screen, if he does a refresh of slaves, nothing will happen because the master is responsible for the input output transactions. So it is very important to know that. Also, let's take a different example. Let's say the user has a KML which has all the information regarding a image overlay. Let's say a logo overlay. So then he then he actually overwrites that KML into slaves.kml, the preferred slave machine where he or she wants to overlay that image. Then he does, let's say he by mistakenly does a master refresh. He does a refresh of master. Then still he won't be able to see any results here, because the intended slave screen was not refreshed, but despite he refreshed the master one, which was out of context. It was not necessary there. So you have to take care about all those things here. So let's move on to the next page. Let's talk about another alternative method of refresh, the direct query method. So here, as you can see, this is the command, this is the code for this refresh. So what this refresh does, uh, I will explain it to you line by line, and this is a very simpler way, and it won't be very hard for you to understand this thing. So in this query method, we actually give a content, a string to this function. The string can be a KML file. So what happens? We first encode this string, the KML file, with a base 64 encoding, and after that we echo that encoded string into the queried.txt of the temp folder in our master rig. So what and as you know, the echo is a Linux command which is used to overwrite strings onto a text file. And then we run this command, and after returning the result, you will be able to see a clean refresh. So let's see encode. It converts command to base 64 for a safer transmission. So why we encoded our string into base 64? We can also just neglect this encoding process here. It would be still fine, but it is a best practice to do a base 64 encoding before overwrite it, before doing overwrite action onto the query.text, because this base 64 encoding actually prevents the shell interpretation of some special characters like a dollar sign, quotes, or new line characters, etc. Then we decode and write it onto the query text of the temp folder in our master machine, and the Google Earth, the LG's query handler picks up the command automatically. So as you have overwritten the your intended KML into that query.text, the LG's query handler will automatically do its job, and it will display the intended KML onto the LG screens. So this is a very direct method for the refresh. So let's move on to the next page. Let's talk about some common pitfalls and best practices that you can do as a developer in the Liquid Galaxy project. So let's talk about some common pitfalls. The first one is forgetting the 1 second delay between add and remove. So as you know, here in the refresh process is it's all about adding refresh intervals, then waiting, and then removing a refresh interval. So it is very important to add a 1 second delay between the add and remove, because our master machine needs time to read the KML files. The second one is not escaping file paths with slashes. This is a very basic mistake which many people does. Then the next one is using wrong myplaces.kml files. So as I have explained you earlier, this is very important. First of all, you have to know what is your use case, and then you have to use that particular KML. Let's say, for example, I will explain you it one more time. Let's say you have to display a logo, then you will be using slaves.kml. And let's say if you have to display a KML, or you have to do a tour, or you have to fly to a location, or you have to send a 3D object, then you will use the master.kml for doing the transactions and the refresh things. The fourth one is refresh loops. if removal step fails. So it is important that you do the second step. If you neglect the second step, then it goes into a loop. So the loading things, it goes into a loop and it never stops. So it is actually suggested to look in the refresh steps and to uh, make sure that the removal step is done. Now let's go to the best practices that one can do here. First one is to always clear the old KMLs before sending new content. It is very important that after your use, you clear the KMLs, because it after clearing the KML, what happens? Uh, you will see a clear screen on your LG machines. So I will go into my slides here in this real world usage examples. As you can see here in the bottom, I have done a clear.kml, and I have explained you it earlier that after my work was done, I cleared the KMLs. So, there is a transparency in our work. Now let's go to the second point. Use appropriate refresh methods for content type. I have explained you it earlier. Then the third point is adding delays after write operations. So it is a very a universal advice that everyone should remember, that after any write operations in anything, in literally anything, you have to add a small delay of a required time. And let's get to the final and the last point, which is verify the file paths which matches your target screen. It is very important to look at where your KML files are getting sended, where it is getting overwritten. You have to do a double check on it, so that you won't get fall into any mistakes. So this was all about my today's presentation. Thank you. Keep exploring and keep learning.